Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show.
Good morning, y'all. Happy Wednesday. Rebecca, it's Haitian Flag Day. I paid attention this morning. Vic says paid attention. Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. I obviously am not Benjamin Dixon. I am Anoa Changa filling in once again for Ben. Didn't realize I'd be back so soon, but it's good to be here with y'all again. I'm a little, I don't know if I'm a little sleepy or a little wired, but last night was a pretty large primary election night. 5 states had primary races. And, some folks sit out of primaries. They're just like, whatever, it doesn't really, my vote doesn't really matter anyway. I'll show up and vote for, whoever, if they do show up and vote, right? Or people are understandably frustrated with the entire electoral process. However, we do know by some of the races last night, we do know from years past that every vote counts. Every vote actually does matter. Last I checked, I was literally up to 2 a.m. watching returns, trying to keep up from returns. And, by the time you get to the wee hours, it's very, very slow. It'll be refresh, no vote change, refresh, no vote change. So finally I went to sleep. But several different states, you had Kentucky, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Idaho, Oregon. Did I get those? Kentucky, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Idaho, Oregon. Yes, got them all. Having primary elections last night for the major parties, Republicans and Democrats, and those who caucus with either of those parties went to the polls in different primary races. I do believe, this is one I don't think I had on our radar, David, but I do believe that in Idaho, the current governor was able to basically stave off the challenge from his lieutenant governor. And I don't know if y'all had caught the news of the beef in Idaho. Republican governor, Republican lieutenant governor, but they had probably the most beef within an administration across the pandemic. Right. So the Idaho governor on 1 or 2 occasions left the state. And, when the governor leaves the state, the lieutenant governor is often, acting in the acting capacity. That's probably how it is in most states. That's how it is in Idaho. So the lieutenant governor is this really far right. It's hard to call them far-right extremists when this is what's being normalized and becoming part of the mainstream part of the Republican Party in many instances, right? But anyway, she enacted these, these executive orders that forbid mask mandates. There were no mask mandates in Idaho when this was happening. Then she tried to do another executive order that forbid the ability to use vaccine mandates, et cetera. There were no vaccine mandates in Idaho when she was doing that. And then, when the governor came back, he had to completely undo them. She spoke at, one of those far right sponsored conferences alongside folks like Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, really outlandish stuff, right? And we're seeing, more critique happening very clearly, not just on what people have ordinarily considered the fringe of the right, but the mainstream of the Republican Party that has allowed things like replacement theory, which I'm sure folks have talked about in regards to Buffalo already this week on the show. But it was really interesting to see that voters, at least in that instance, repudiated the more extreme of the two in their primary, and the Idaho governor seems to be on his way. So we'll see what happens in that race. Wasn't actually really one that was on my radar, but as we're seeing, these different candidates, now it might not matter to people, right? I don't live in Idaho. I don't got people in Idaho. Why do I care? It really does matter who is running states, whether we live in them or not, because some of the laws, some of the things that they can enact could actually impact us where we are, right? Or where our loved ones are, or what our opportunity looks like. And we should just care about the goodwill of other folks wherever they are. That's just my personal philosophy. So thinking, we had North Carolina, former North Carolina State Supreme Court Justice Sherry Beasley went into the primary as the presumptive Democratic nominee, and that was confirmed. She, sailed very quickly, easily in the evening to being the confirmed Democratic nominee. She is the first Black, not just first Black woman, but first Black, I believe, Supreme Democratic nominee for Senate from North Carolina. We also have Charles Booker in Kentucky, also cleared, and he wasn't running unopposed, I don't believe. But when I looked, I know I saw other folks on the returns. But he also cleared a pathway. And I really do think when we think about Charles Booker's really amazing run in 2020, right? Charles Booker made a valiant, amazing, strong push at the very end of that primary. The 2020 primary, that was COVID happening. So a lot of primaries got shifted around. There was a lot of confusion. And his campaign was very agile and adapted. And again, they came up a little short at the very end with all the different changes. People were getting locked out of the one main voting in person center. I think that was in Louisville, if I remember correctly. But Booker, with whether it's Hood to the Holler, organizing that he started to do during his campaign and continued with the actual organization Hood to the Holler, built the groundwork to set the stage for him to be the first Black nominee coming out of Kentucky. What I think is really important, and I think Charles Booker and Brother Booker, as other Senator Booker, Cory Booker calls him, I don't purport to speak for Brother Booker at all, but what I do believe is that I'm sure he would say that while it is important to have his representation going into this matchup against Rand Paul, right, and not just his representation as a Black father, as someone who struggled in terms of the medical system, there's so many intersections of his identity, and we use that phraseology, but I really do think there's something powerful with this crop of Black and other folks of color working class candidates that we had that are really taking on the machine in several different cases. And so while there wasn't a machine in this race, Charles Booker's, like I said, his very valiant run against, the chosen, disappointing candidacy of Amy McGrath. Folks were trying to say from a long shot, as much as y'all thought that she was going to be, the Grim Reaper, it wasn't happening. And it didn't happen. And it was a super expensive win. So folks need to give Charles Booker their coins. If you gave money to Amy McGrath, you damn sure better be giving them to Charles Booker and helping Kentuckians do what needs to be done and sending someone like that to the states, to the U.S. Senate. That is not me, campaigning for the brother. That's just facts, right? If you was out here throwing your coins at what was very, very clearly a lost cause with Amy McGrath, who really had nothing of substance to offer except for she was Republican light, which is a strategy that has failed Democrats for, I don't know, how what decade is this? And we see that happening, multiple different states as well. On the Republican side, obviously, Senator Rand Paul is the nominee. I mean, no one's running against him. And it'd just be really interesting to see the way in which Booker is able to expand and build, and whether or not the DSCC or other national organizations who will show up on the ground for Kentuckians for, some of these areas. They lament states and decisions that are ending abortion, that are attacking voting rights. Even though Kentucky has a Democratic governor, it has a Republican AG that actually maybe have committed an ethics violation by trying to open an investigation against the governor when he's planning on running against him, which is actually like an ethics rule they have. So it's just really interesting to see how Democrats nationally do decide to invest in some of these races. Now, when we look at on the Republican side, some of these races, and it's really interesting. The one that caught my eye the most, I mean, obviously people have been paying attention to the PA Senate, but I think the Pennsylvania gubernatorial race is actually a very fascinating one, in the sense that AG Josh Shapiro will be the Democratic nominee for governor. But on the Republican side, you have a Trump-supported big lie proponent who actually tried to overturn the Pennsylvania elections, as the Doug Mastriano is not only the front runner, he is now the GOP nominee for governor in Pennsylvania. Now, one of the good things about Pennsylvania is that you had a really strong turnout, right? And when you look at the total number of Democrats voting compared to the total number of Republicans. So I mean, when you look at the Senate race, when you look at the gubernatorial race, really at all these different races, there are several different congressional races and state house races, down ballot races, down all the way the ballot absolutely matters. There's so much that was happening, and, building on that momentum and really building a broad case. race. It's going to be interesting to see how, Shapiro, who has run and won statewide, like I said, he is the AG. What's also really important about Pennsylvania in particular, out of all of these states, is that they do not elect their Secretary of State. The Secretary of State is actually appointed in Pennsylvania and I believe in New Jersey and a couple other states by the governor. So I think Florida is another state. I mean, I know that DeSantis just appointed someone new as Secretary of State. So in Pennsylvania, whoever wins this election will appoint the Secretary of State that will be in charge of administering elections come 2024. As well as whatever elections may happen in 2023. But the 2024 presidential election cycle, those primaries, that process, vote by mail rules, all of that will be overseen by the person that is nominated by the winner of this. And having someone who not only ascribed to the big lie, but gave it its full-throated support, that is really actually disconcerting for those who care to claim about democracy and fairness. I had an opportunity to actually do a conversation with the current acting Secretary of State. It's actually Secretary of the Commonwealth in PA, since PA is a Commonwealth, but the Secretary of the Commonwealth. And we talked about just how there were nearly 36, I think it was over 30 lawsuits coming after the 2020 election, all frivolous, all thrown out, all upheld that the 2020 election was absolutely fair. This has been, consistently across the board, but you have candidates like this that are pushing forward across multiple different races around the country and in positions that could definitely have an impact on elections going forward. So I do know that we can, sometimes the process can absolutely frustrate us, but our ability to even choose, like I explained to my son when he was trying to decide whether he was going to vote or not, right? At least register, at least decide that if you want to be a part of the process, you can. If you don't even take those initial steps, you can't even participate. You don't even have an opportunity to be engaged and involved, right? And so I personally firmly believe that when we're looking at these people who are they're not just like, oh, both sides are the same. This is a situation where both sides are absolutely not the same. You have one side that is absolutely trying to undermine free and fair elections, our ability to engage in this democracy. Not saying that Democrats have not themselves, because I'm going to get to, if we got time, I might get to what's going on. We might get a little time. I might get to what's happening in New York, or we might say that for tomorrow. But yeah, I'll be back tomorrow too. But so it's not saying that Democrats themselves do not have shenanigans and foolishness when it comes to voting, but when we're looking at the egregious level of what is happening with Republican candidates and the way in which they are doubling down and racing to the bottom, it is very alarming. And so that brings me to the Pennsylvania Senate race. Big John Fetterman knocked out the park, literally took, when you look at the map, and you know how when you look at those maps of like these races, the different candidates will have different colors. John Fetterman's color was purple, I think on the New York Times map, and the whole state was purple. Bruh dominated everywhere. I mean, he seems to have been pretty popular as lieutenant governor. Folks may have different issues with him, but his campaign solidly got out there. People who were Connor Lamb, when you look at the final numbers, did not have a chance to stop him. And Malcolm Kenyatta, State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta was, quite a bit behind as well, but still, gave a valiant effort in his final push. But it's really interesting to see like how these different, there was an idea that possibly folks could switch to Lamb or Kenyatta in, this final stretch, because Fetterman did recently have a stroke. I believe he recently just had a pacemaker installed. And I know on social it said that he was, he had the all clear. So, definitely wishing him the best of health as he goes into this general election cycle. And it looks like Pennsylvania is actually really in a really strong position to pick up another seat. Now, we all know, though, that strong position or not, that is definitely ground that could be lost if folks are not making sure they're building the broadest coalition possible and they're out there engaging, supporting voters. And I know there has been concerns that different folks have raised about an incident in particular in the past with Fetterman pulling a gun on, I believe it was a black jogger. And there seems to be some chatter about whether or not that person actually even maybe voted for him. So it's going to be interesting to see how and if that actually plays in the race going forward. It also depends upon who his actual opponent is. As of, I think right before I checked, Dr. Mehmet Oz, Dr. Oz, oh God bless Oprah and all that she's freaked on us with all these interesting people. Anyway, but Dr. Oz was up by approximately 2,000 votes, I believe it was. I was eyeballing, so forgive my math. Dr. Oz was up. He pulled up very, very early in the wee hours. And, very tight race right there still, but still has not been called. So we'll see what happens in terms of what this Senate matchup looks like. Yeah, this is going to be interesting. I mean, all across the board. But Dr. Oz was backed also by the gubernatorial candidate, as well as Dr. Oz, both backed by Trump. I mean, Trump, throwing his weight in where he can just because he can. So we'll see. We'll see what it looks like on the ballot. The race that I'm super excited to talk about. Oh, so this makes me so. I know it hasn't been called yet, but State Representative Summerlee. I first met Summerlee, who's running in Pennsylvania's 12th congressional district, who's running against multi-million-dollar smear campaigns, who's running against an establishment-backed candidate. But what folks don't understand about Summer, that's literally what Summer has been doing ever since she first ran in 2018. I first met Summer in 2018. And I was just impressed by this young woman. I'm several years older than her. She was I think a more recent-ish graduate of Howard Law School. Shout out to Bison's. I was just so impressed with her and her composure. She had just did this amazing thing, and she was so down to earth. She was so chill. It was like, wow, you're about to be like this little progressive star on the rise. And she was just like, I'm still just Summerlee. And so we kept in touch over the years. And, I would always check in with her just to learn more about, because I was really impressed by the way she was building in her little corner of the world in Allegheny County, Western Pennsylvania. Pittsburgh, that area is not far from where I spent some of my time in Morgantown, West Virginia. If you wanted to go to the big city, you went to Pittsburgh. So it was just really interesting listening to her and, how they were growing, how they were building. And she unseated an incumbent in 2018. He tried, remember we were sitting, having, I think, breakfast, and she was telling me about how he tried to claim that she wasn't actually a resident because she had been away at school. That's not really how residency works with kids in college, law school, et cetera. That's not how it works. So they were trying anything and everything. 2020 comes around. She's running for re-election. She's the incumbent now. Generally, Democrats have this incumbent protection policy, right? But no, she was the only incumbent in the Allegheny County delegation that did not have the path cleared for her. She was the only one that had a challenger, and the party actually worked against her to try to replace her with the challenger. So she just, continued with the coalition that she kept building and grinding with, and whooped all of them too. So here we are, 2022. She's running for Congress. There's an even bigger coalition working against her. And, Summerlee does what Summerlee does and has some of the best and brightest people on the ground in Pittsburgh, in Allegheny County, in that region, as well as, other folks supporting her around the state and the national folks. Because, I see a lot of national folks really excited. I'm a national person that's really excited and patting themselves on the back for what they might have done. But let's be clear that if and when, and it's most likely when, it is absolutely confirmed that Summer, because there were several thousand votes still when I checked at 2 a.m. and I checked again at 8 a.m. and it hadn't really budged any. Summer was up by around 500 votes. It was very tight. At one moment, it was approximately 47 vote race. So it's very impressive to see what is happening and what she herself is able to do. And I'm in awe at the way in which people are building coalitions. A lot of people talk about building people power movement, right? That was some language people picked up from Bernie. Everyone who runs as a Bernie crowd or a progressive candidate, they always use this language. Summer's actually doing it. Another candidate I want to give a shout out to is Attica Scott, State Rep Attica Scott, who ran in Kentucky's 3rd congressional district. Although that race did not turn out as, strong or how, I think some folks would have liked, Attica included. That is another person that I have watched over the last several years since 2016, building a community, building a coalition, and finding that support. And somehow, when we're talking about building the machine and countering, what are these, very well moneyed operations to stifle progressive voices, particularly Black and other people of color voices. Because when you look at several different races last night and the amount of money spent by, groups like AIPAC, the PAC are connected to AIPAC and other organizations that are, pro-Israel PACs, like, there was a lot. There were millions upon millions of dollars spent to deny working class Black and other women of color entry into that dome in DC. And when what we know is that the status quo will do whatever it can, however it can, no matter what values it claims to have on Monday, it will stomp you in the ground on Tuesday if it means that is what's going to uphold its ground. So I'm very impressed to see, like I said, most likely win. Summer has confirmed the winner, but it's probably not over even with the final count. I don't know if we have any video from Summer speaking last night, but I would love to share a little clip.
I'm trying to get it to Dwayne, but it didn't make it into the folder, unfortunately. Yeah.
It does not. It's totally okay. I probably actually could pull it up on Twitter and play it in the microphone myself. But basically, one thing that really grabbed me is that her whole speech last night, she declared victory shortly after midnight. So I still stayed up. Like, she declared victory. They were up by about, I think it was like 500 and some odd votes or so. Like I said, I'm eyeballing because it's late at night. She got an email and was like, yep, Summer declares victory. I was like, oh, okay. But looking at how many votes are outstanding, looking at where the ballot drops were coming in, I'm guessing that her team was figuring out, I know her campaign manager, Annie, as well. And so, it just seemed like they had a good sense of where the votes would be coming in from. And so to explain to people who might not understand that, when you're running an election, when you're running a campaign and you're doing it well, you have a sense on what your numbers are, right? You have a sense on where the numbers are coming in from. If you have people, because in some places they might do like tally tolls at the polls. So you might have folks like going to different polls, getting the final tally. So you got people in your war room crunching numbers. So you have a sense of how things are shaking out. You have a sense of what's possible, right? This is at multiple different levels. Maybe, lower level candidates are not able always to do this, but definitely when you're talking about a congressional race, Senate race, presidential, et cetera, what's shaking out and how things are happening. So when I say they knew where votes was coming from, that's not no funny business. That's just the way in which people who actually understand about running field and running campaigns do things. And so, one of the things I would really, what was fascinating is just watching Summer talk about the community, watching Summer talk about this coalition as she's speaking to this very diverse room. Now, you had people trying to paint her as divisive. You had people trying to paint her as anti-Semitic, all types of stuff, right? Like literally, she spoke with Zerlina Maxwell back in, I think it was the end of March, about a video clip of Steve Irwin, who was her major competitor, just talking about how he's watched her work. He allegedly was a supporter of hers. I actually spoke to her about that specifically, and she was like, we can't find any evidence of him, quote unquote, supporting me, unless he supported her in his mind, which we don't have any evidence of that. There's no evidence for what she told me of donations or anything like that as well. And so what was really interesting, though, is one thing she said in her response to his basically minimizing the impact of the first Black, and I believe actually Summer's the first Black woman elected to Congress from Pennsylvania. I need to double check that, but I believe not just Western Pennsylvania, but from Pennsylvania. And so, or she will be. And so, she is, like a lot of people, like representation, like me sitting here talking to you about politics as a Black woman informed through the lens from my radical Black parents absolutely matters. That representation and my presence in these spaces absolutely matters. But that is not the end all be all. It is also the value and what else is being brought to the conversation, right? And so when Summer is speaking to this diverse group of people, and she's talking about, when they tell you Black women can't win, when they tell you that we can't build a multiracial, multi-generational, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was a really great speech. If someone can actually there's a Twitter link, and I also wrote an article about it. Folks can drop it in the chat so people can check it out. But it was a really powerful speech, and she really just spoke to the core issues. She also spoke about how you can run on values and win. So you can run on values like, being pro environment, clean air, clean water. You can run on, being for Medicare for all. You can run on being positive on educational values and things of that nature. You can run on critical issues that matter. She's very, very vocal and very, very strong-willed. And folks may think like, oh, well, they're both Democrats. What's the big deal? This is basically the general election. Like this primaries like this are the general. This is where, even though they still technically have a general election, like it's an overwhelmingly Democratic district, the person who wins this race, they can't pull no funny stuff like the Buffalo mayor, because ain't nobody got rules like that down in Pennsylvania. But this is what it is, plain and simple, right? And so when you have someone like Summer, even though it's not a flip in terms of red to blue, it is a flip in terms of a more centrist, yes, they may have voted. I think it was Mike Doyle, who's the retiring congressman for this area. Yes, he may have voted the right way on certain things. But when you have someone like a Summer who goes in there and adds the power with a Cori Bush and a Jamal Bowen and a Ayanna Pressley, Summer had the backing of, I think, almost the entire, if not the entire Congressional Progressive Caucus. Like she really pulled together a strong national. And do we have audio too, or just the video? Yeah. She's not very tall, right? Like we're both probably around 5'3" ish. Sorry, girl, for throwing out height and stuff. But she has this power and presence that really just motivates and engages people. But what I've watched from Summer is that as fierce of an advocate as she is, she's still willing to listen. She's still willing to consider, and she's just not going to jump out there just because of anything. And that's what I appreciate about her the most. And that's why I think she was able to pull in. She pulled in support from groups like Emily's List, Hires Height, the Working Families Party. She had a broad coalition of support, right? I think, don't quote me on this because I was up really, really late last night. I think she might have had support from like J Street. She had a whole mixture of organizations that supported her candidacy. Sunrise campaign, like a Sunrise movement, a lot of different folks came together. So I really do think that what we need to do is not just try to duplicate what we think we're seeing on social media with these types of campaigns, but also understanding that Summer's likely win in 2022 is built on the foundational support of Summer's win from 2018. Right. And how we have this we have to think the long game. You might lose that one cycle, but this also goes for people who support candidates. And I know when we're talking about individual dollar contributors, it can be tough. We don't always necessarily have them dollars, to be stretching and just throwing around. And so we really make it count. But when you're an organization, you need to be committed to investing people for the long haul, because it takes a lot to flip. It takes a lot to run up against the machine. And we need to be very clear on what the value, mission, and supports are. So it's probably why Justice Dems, kind of narrowed some of their focus with some of these races and focused on maybe some races and not others. Who knows? There's a calculus to all of this. We might not like it, but unfortunately, we're working up against a really huge juggernaut in some areas. And regardless of what the final outcome is, even though it more than likely is probably going to finally shake out in Summer's way, they seem very sure of it at least. I'm very proud to have watched the evolution of, her candidacy. Now in Pennsylvania, she was also able still to run. This is fascinating. She was also able still to run for her reelection for her current seat. So even if Summer did not advance as Congresswoman, she would still be, I believe, if I understood this correctly, state representative. And the same with Malcolm Kenyatta. Malcolm Kenyatta does not lose his, I believe when I was looking at results last night, he was still reelected as state representative as well. Interesting snafu. So you can run for multiple positions if you're already in one in Pennsylvania, but you can't be a sore loser and try and jump into a race after the fact like the mayor of Buffalo did. Boom. So this has been another episode of I'm petty. I'm purposefully petty, y'all. So this is another episode of
I love it.
The Benjamin Dixon Morning Show. I'm going to kick it back over to the team. And I think Ben might be coming in, even though he had me in early morning. So I might stick around for a few minutes to chop it up with Big Ben.